Welcome back to AP World History, your chapter videos. Today we're focusing on chapter 11, which is Crisis and Recovery in Afro-Eurasia between 1300 and 1500. So we're leaving that time period of 1000 through 1300 and we're moving into the 13s through the 15s. So most of this chapter is going to focus wholly on Afro-Eurasia, not Sub-Saharan Africa and not the Americas. So for this chapter, no Sub-Saharan Africa, no Americas, only the Islamic world, India, China, and Christian Europe. So let's go on and get started. Per usual, it's a nice long chapter. All right, so what are our core objectives? What are we going to get out of this chapter? We're going to describe the nature and origin of crises spanning Afro-Eurasia during the 14th century and assess the magnitude of the crises' effects locally and trans-regionally. All right, so that means we're going to look at some kind of crisis and we're going to see how that crisis impacts things locally, where it starts, and then trans-regionally as it spreads. So I wonder what this crisis is going to be. Next, we're going to explain the continuities of religious belief systems from the 14th through the 15th century. So from the 1300s all the way through the 1400s, what kind of religious continuities are we going to see? Is it going to be Islam? Is it going to be Christianity? Is it going to be Hinduism and Buddhism? What are we going to see that's going to stay the same with the religions? We're going to compare the ways in which regional rulers in the post-plague Afro-Eurasia attempted to construct unified states and analyze the extent and nature of their success. So that might be the crisis, the plague. So how does the plague impact and then later on unify different communities, different regions, different areas? Next, we're going to examine the ways in which the art and or architecture of different regions reflected political realities and describe the specific themes that communicate these messages to viewers. And finally, we're going to compare the means by which the Iberian kingdoms, so Iberian Peninsula, that's where modern day Spain and Portugal are located. So it's that part of Western Europe that's hanging off kind of close to Africa. So we're going to see or compare the means by which the Iberian kingdoms, the Ottoman Empire, and the Ming Dynasty and the European polities each extended their territories and regional influences. So how are these regions going to unify, spread their borders, and eventually come into conflict? All right, so the global storylines, the crisis of the Black Death. This is what the main themes of your chapter. So the spread of the Black Death and the collapse of the Mongol Empire set off crises across Afro-Eurasia, with the major demographic, political, economic, and cultural consequences. So how is the Black Plague going to cause demographic shifts? Are we going to lose a lot of people? How is it going to cause political shifts? Are people going to trust their political governments after you have a pandemic where your government couldn't really save you? How about economically? What's going to happen economically if you lose a large number of your population, of your working population? And finally, the cultural consequences. What kind of cultural consequences are going to happen because of the Black Death? Next up, the next main point. Across Afro-Eurasia, continuities in religious beliefs and cultural institutions accompanies changes in political structures in Europe, the Muslim world, and China. So as I said, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, how are those things going to stay the same during this time period? Next, in Central Eurasia, new rulers, most notably the Ottoman, rebuild dynasties in place of the Mongols, using a blend of religion, military expansion, administrative control, and cultural tolerance. So a hallmark of that area in general is cultural tolerance, especially when you're dealing with Muslim rulers like the Ottomans. But we'll learn more about the Ottomans and how they kind of pick up the fragments of the Mongols as well as the fallen Byzantine Empire. In Western Christendom, new monarchies establish political order, and the Renaissance brings a cultural rebirth to societies devastated by the plague. So these new monarchies rise up after the plague because maybe people don't trust their governments as much as they did previously. And then the Renaissance. People need a rebirth. They need to see beautiful things in the midst of so much dying, so much death, so much trauma. And finally, in East Asia, the Ming Dynasty replaces the Mongol Yuan Dynasty, using the elaborate Confucian bureaucracy to oversee infrastructure and long-distance trading. So China is known for having a highly stratified bureaucracy, having a very, very well-placed civil service system that yields lots of successful and prepared and merit-based young people, instead of using that bloodline heredity that might lead to a weakened or a lesser political system. And we're going to see how when they use those ideals, how they're going to impact long-distance trading and continue to help China be one of the most dominant areas or regions of the world. All right, so Black Death. So I told you guys I was going to start highlighting things that were really important that you guys should take note of. So remember, so I don't know how you're going to take notes. So you might take notes based on what you see, but also knowing that you have a chart to do. So it might just be easier to take notes based on your chart. So I'm going to highlight the things that I think are going to be impactful for you. And I'm going to give you a nice grid that tells you what each color represents or what each color means. And that's going to be up on the screen right now. So check that out. And when you see it, just know that the different colors mean different things, and you can add them to different parts of your chart. The Black Death is going to be a disease that stems from a combination of the bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic strains of the plague. And it was the most significant historical development in the 14th century. So nothing else was as important as the plague coming up in the 1300s. And we'll see why. So it's going to be spread by rodent and human carriers. And the plague is going to be a bacteria and disease that spreads through Afro-Eurasia overland and through sea trade routes. So those trade routes are going to lead to a direct impact on the spread of the disease. So if you're meeting lots of people, interacting with lots of people, that means you're coming in contact with a lot more diseases and viruses. And when it comes to Black Plague, they're definitely going to have a lot of contact. But here's the difference. During this time period, they don't have access to microscopes. They don't understand that bacteria is what causes diseases. They just know that people are getting sick, and when you hang around them, you die. So just stay away from those people. But they don't really have a true understanding of science in the way that we do in 2020. So all this death that's going to happen, the plague is going to cause a staggering loss of life, with death rates between 25 and 65%, depending on where you are. In parts of Europe, they're going to lose over half of their population. It's going to take 200 plus years to rebuild their population to the level that it was before the plague. So this is going to be a hugely important event in world history. Let's look at the map. Let's see how the plague is going to spread. So the plague starts in the Mongol Empire. Definitely starts in the Mongol Empire. And we're going to see it spread north, going towards parts of China or other parts of Asia. And then we're going to also see it just start to spread all the way around Afro-Eurasia. So it goes through, if you keep on going west, once you leave Asia, it's going to go over that top portion of Asia, that centralized portion of Asia. It's going to drop down, go into the Arabian Peninsula. It's going to go into North Africa. It's going to reach all the way into Europe. And I promise you, had Europe had extended trading with the Americas, it would have made it into the Americas. But we're still a few hundred years away from that extensive connection between those two. So you can see all of the trading that's happening. Basically, also, if you look at the trade maps pretty much follow the same routes of the bubonic plague, or of the Black Death, excuse me. So rebuilding states, if you lose between 25 and 65% of your population, that is a huge, huge, huge percentage. So unlike, like a fly can be reborn within a week and a half, 2 weeks. For a human being, it takes 9 months for you to, be gestational in your mother's stomach. And then after that, it takes an additional, 15, almost 20 years so that you're able to be an adult and then able to go into the working world or be in the military or things like that. So this is a major impact and a major setback if you have to wait almost 20 years to replace the people who have died during the Black Plague. So how are they going to rebuild themselves? So number one, The basis for political legitimacy and power was the dynasty or the hereditary ruling family passing power from generation to generation. So that's going to be the basis for political legitimacy during this time period for a lot of regions of the world. So power is going to be derived from that divine right. So I've talked about this a little bit. So one day somebody woke up and said, hey, I had a dream last night. God told me I'm the leader. I'm the best one I'm the best person to lead you. And they were able to convince people that dream was true and then start leading people. And that happens throughout history. Divine right, mandate of heaven, whatever else you want to call it. They have all the same name, but basically it means that God has bestowed power upon me to lead you. And therefore you have to listen to me because God said it. And so that tends to carry a lot more weight during this time period because people are like, well, if God said it to you, then it must be true. Okay? All right, and so one more time, we're going to see there's going to be a clear rules of succession. Well, obviously, if I have a son, my first son is going to be the leader. There it is. If I have a daughter first and then I have a son second, well, guess what? My son's going to be the leader. It's pretty easy, okay? And next up, we're going to see consolidation. It consolidates and extends power through conquest, alliances, or laws and punishment. So during this time period, you'll see like the ruling families in certain areas, they just intermarry each other. They're like, hey, I know you might be my cousin, but I want to keep the power inside of our family. I know the bloodline is strong, so I'm going to send my daughter from England to Germany, and then, some other person might send a person from Germany to Netherlands, or Netherlands to Spain, or who else knows where it may go. So intermarriage, conquest, alliances, all those things are going to unify and bring together some of these areas. All right, so next up we're going to have new Islamic states. The Black Death and Mongol invasions brought an end to the old political order for the Abbasid Empire and its capital, Baghdad, and led to the emergence of three new Islamic states: the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughal dynasty. I love talking about these three dynasties: the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughal dynasties. Okay, those are going to rise out of the ashes of the Abbasid Empire, and we're going to see the region that they take over. So we're going to see the Mughals are going to be a part of India, or most of India actually. We're going to see the Safavids are going to be in that Middle East region that we know of today, and the Ottomans are going to be in parts of Eastern Europe, all the way down to North Africa, all the way into parts of into parts of Asia, So we're going to see that they're going to be very vast and very spread out in how they establish themselves in the rise of some of those original Muslim dynasties. All right, so after the Mongols, okay, new Islamic states, the Mongol legacy. So now we're focusing specifically on the Islamic world. So if you're looking at that chart, the Islamic world is where you should be focusing specifically. So you should have already read the book, hopefully, okay? All right, so the Mongol legacy and the rise of the new Islamic dynasties. The Mongols, and with its small population, assimilated into the cultures of the conquered, adopted new languages, and converted to Islam. Okay, so the Mongols are going to convert into Islam and then be known as an Islamic dynasty. So once again, because they're so small, even though they're very military power, they have a lot of military power, they're still going to be really small. So they're going to assimilate, which means they're going to merge and join into the dominant culture in the regions that they're taking over. Okay, they're going to adopt those languages because it's easier to phase out yours when yours is a smaller minority language, and to do business in the broader language of the areas that you conquered. And finally, as I said previously, they're going to convert to Islam. The Mongols had two components to their rule: terror tactics, which coerced the conquered into voluntary submission. All right, so that's number one. It's like either I'm going to kill you, I'm going to take all of your things, I'm going to abuse everyone in your family, or you can just nicely give me your things and I don't have to kill you. So people are just going to say, hey, please don't kill me, Mr. Mongol. And once again, I told you guys, the Mongols, if you guys are thinking about it, keep going back to the joke because it works. If you saw a bunch of little kids who had nothing but silver teeth running at you, what are you going to do? Run. I hope you run, okay? So we're going to see that happening, that people are going to see the Mongols coming in and they'll be like, oh, man, not Charlotte, oh, dog, oh. And they just give up all their things, all right? The other thing the Mongols are known for is the promotion and the exchange of technology, knowledge, and skill, which benefited their culture, or excuse me, their vast empire, not their culture, their vast empire. So literally, because they're going into these areas where they're the minority, they're going to exchange ideas. They're going to take what works for them and leave what does not work, or some kind of blending of the two different societies. And we're going to see that's going to make their empire actually kind of better. Okay. And finally, the aftermath of the Mongol rule and the Black Death created power shifts to create a new Islamic world. So once again, the Mongols are going to fade away, partially due to the mass amounts of people dying from Black Death. And then as they pass away, or as the ashes of their empire are there, it's going to kind of be fertilizer and fuel for the three new Islamic empires that are going to rise up. And once again, it's going to be the Ottomans, the Safavids, and as well as the Mughal dynasty, okay, or the Mughal Empire. All right, so the next part, or the second part, the new empires in the Islamic heartland. So one more time, those three empires. The one that's honestly going to be the most important is going to be one of the longest lasting empires in world history. And for a while, it had a lot of land. This empire goes all the way from 1300 all the way until about 1920, 1922. It depends on who you talk to. Maybe 1918, towards the end of World War I. So it's going to be a super, 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 super long-lasting dynasty, and that's going to be the Ottoman Empire, okay? All right, so one more time. These three Islamic empires are going to emerge, and they're going to be expanding from an Arabic-dominated Islamic world to include the Turkish and Persian-speaking populations. So all three of these dynasties rise up from Persian and Turkish ashes, okay? Number one, the Ottomans. The Ottomans became the most powerful as they occupied the strategic area between Europe and Asia, including the former Byzantine territories. As I said previously, they had a lot of land, and because they were so good at conquering, with Suleiman the Magnificent and some of their other leaders, we're going to see all of the growth they're going to do. Next two are going to be the Safavids. Not going to be nearly as long-lasting an empire as the Ottoman Empire, but they do a lot of things culturally for the Islamic world. And then also you have the Mughal dynasty, which is going to be important because they work to further unify, or try to further unify the the Indian peninsula, okay? Rise of the Ottoman Empire. Seljuk Turks, warrior nomads, transformed themselves into rulers of a highly bureaucratic empire. They're going to take note from some of their Eastern neighbors about how bureaucracy helps to stratify and run a society. And it's going to be pretty successful for the Ottoman Empire. So under Osman, he's going to rule between 1299 and 1326. The Turks consolidated their power by attracting artisans, merchants, bureaucrats, and clerics. When we think about the culture, can those things improve the culture in an area? I think so. Okay, so the Ottomans are going to be a champion of Sunni Islam. So their religion, where would that go on the chart? Is that going to be a part of culture? Is that going to be a part of society? Where would you put that? Would that be part of interactions, since they're doing interactions? Okay, so by the mid-14th century, the Ottomans created a vast multi-ethnic, multilingual empire in the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia. So because it's so large and it encompasses so many different territories, there's going to be so many different cultures, so many different languages, ethnicities, so many things happening in this area. And finally, the Ottomans created a large bureaucracy with the Sultan as the head. So whenever you hear the word Sultan, you need to know that it's going to be an Islamically dominated area, and we're talking about something to do in the Islamic world. So if you hear a Shah, Sultan, Caliphate, anything like that, those are going to let you know that automatically we're talking about an Islamic area. 15th century Ottoman expansion. The conquest of Constantinople, all right, this major city that's been taken over a few times. The empire's spectacular expansion was due to their mighty military power, which also generated vast financial and administrative rewards. So once again, if my military is stronger than your military, guess what? I can definitely take over and have lots of money because I can just take everything that I want from you. Number two, we're in an Islamic area. So guess what? You also have to pay a tax if you're non-Islamic. That's more money coming into your areas. The most spectacular triumph is going to come from Mehmet the Conqueror. He is going to be the leader, and in 1453, he's going to have a conquest of Constantinople, the former capital of the Roman Byzantine Empire. And he's going to rename that Istanbul. And that name is still around today. So Istanbul is in modern day Turkey. Okay, so modern day Turkey is the area that we're talking about, and remembering that the Ottomans were formed from the Turkish Empire, or from the Turks, excuse me. The fall had positive cultural benefits for Western Europe. So as Constantinople falls, okay, we're going to see that the Christian refugees from those areas are going to bring their classical texts to Western Europe, and it's going to stimulate a European Renaissance. So when those Christians are fleeing, trying to evade being conquered or taken over by the Ottoman Empire, what are they going to do? They're going to take all of their books with them. And those books have previously not been introduced into Europe because Europe's going through its dark ages where they're lacking content, lacking knowledge, and just kind of really being resistant to those who actually have access to the content and the knowledge. But guess what? When these Christian refugees who are of the same religion as them go into their area, now they're going to have an expanding of culture and expanding of text and knowledge and things like that. So guess what? That should go in your chart as well. Okay, so it does talk about, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire, but it's going to impact the Christian world. So I think that Christian Europe should get that part about getting books. Okay. All right, so the Ottoman military expansion continued with the conquest of European cities in Greece, Bosnia, Italy, Hungary, Croatia, and Austria. So the Ottomans are going to take over a lot of Eastern Europe, and they're going to control a lot of Eastern Europe, like I said, all the way until the 1900s. By the late 15th century, Ottomans controlled ports and sea routes on the Mediterranean, blocking European access to Asian trade. So if you want to go trade with Asia, you have to go through the Ottomans and pay taxes or pay whatever, or just in general not go because you're not wanted and you're not welcome, because unfortunately some of the Christians were unwilling to follow certain rules that the Muslims had put into place. All right, so a tool of the empire. So one of my favorite Ottoman rulers is going to be Suleiman the Magnificent, Suleiman the Great, Suleiman the Lawgiver. Suleiman has a whole bunch of descriptive words that go behind his name because he's so phenomenal and so awesome to the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire really does reach its height during Suleiman's rule. All right, so as I said, there it is. Suleiman's going to reach the height of the Ottomans are going to reach the height of their territorial expansion, and they're going to have a max of about 20 to 30 million people. So we're in the 1500s, and you have 20 to 30 million people under your control. That's a lot of people, especially during this time period. But for comparison, just so you guys know, in China, just up the ways a little bit, they have about 100 million people during the same time period. So Suleiman's going to be called Suleiman the Great Turk because he's so amazing in terms of how he was able to conquer and expand. He's going to be called Suleiman the Lawgiver because he's able to codify and create a more fair legal code that is not as abusive to people who don't have as much money. Whereas previous times, if you have less money, good luck on keeping your arms or fingers or hands or whatever it is. And if somebody was rich, they could just pay a fine and, whatever their issue was kind of went away. Okay. And then Suleiman the Magnificent because he was able to just do so many magnificent things. All right. And so he's going to be a gifted military leader and a gifted administrator. So the Ottoman dynasty power fused the secular with the sacred. So we're going to fuse the connection between non-religious and the religious. Sultans are going to call themselves the shadow of God on earth. So once again, your political person is saying, I have a mandate of heaven. I have a divine right. I have the shadow of God, which means that I have more favor and you should be listening to me more because God loves me and God protects me and God is number one. Okay. And so that is pretty much what they're saying and why you should believe them, because I'm seated at the right hand of God. So therefore I have a connection. All right. Sultans are going to become defenders and protectors of the faith and construct mosques and support Islamic schools. So to be a universalizing religion, you have to have political support. Islam is going to get a lot of political support from the Ottoman Empire. So it's going to help it to definitely cement itself as one of those universalizing religions, but then also universities. Looking back at your chart, where university is going to go, they're going to help to establish more Islamic universities with more content that backs up what they're saying. All right, the Ottoman statecraft. Istanbul and the Topkapi Palace reflected the splendor, power, and wealth of the Ottoman Islamic Empire. So that palace, we'll talk about it in one of the next slides. Not that slide, one of the next points. I'll keep on going. So Suleiman is going to build his crowning architectural achievement, the Suleimani Mosque, which is going to be opposite the Hagia Sophia, the most sacred of the Christian cathedrals, among other construction projects. So if we're looking at great Islamic buildings, we're going to say the Suleimani Mosque is going to be comparable to the Hagia Sophia, which is going to be a Christian church. So those two churches, or those two religious worship places, are going to be comparable. So when we think about the Christian world and the Islamic world, Topkapi Palace, that was Topkapi Palace is going to be opposite Hagia Sophia. And so those are both going to be on the screen right now, so you can see the difference and maybe some of the similarities that might be present. Istanbul, Constantinople, is going to become the largest city in the world outside of China. So China, once again, has a huge population, which means they have huge cities. But outside of China, Istanbul is going to become the #1 populous, or the largest city in the whole entire world. That lets you know the power and the force and the dominance and the control that the Ottoman Empire is going to be able to create within a 200-year time period. So they're getting started around 1300, and we're at like 1550. So about 250 years after they started, look at how they're able to change things. All right, so Topkapi Palace was not only the command post of the empire, but also reflected the Ottoman views of governance, religion, and family traditions, as it included a majestic and distant home for rulers, commanders, and the bureaucracy. So it's going to have all of these things fused into one building in one location. And we're going to see that people are going to utilize certain spaces to do lots of things. These gigantic palaces are going to be like communal meeting grounds for people, where you come and connect with people, or come and connect with other people of the same religion. We're going to see bureaucratic offices and training schools also rise up. Looking at China, they did an amazing job with their civil service examination and their bureaucratic offices. So if it's not broke, don't fix it, okay? And let's look over there and see what they're doing, and take some of the things that they're doing and utilize those same things into the Ottoman culture. All right, and next up, we're going to see harem with its own hierarchy and rank and prestige of 10,000 to 12,000 women. So a harem is going to be kind of like the Sultan's favorite women type thing. We're going to see the Sultan's mother and his favorite consorts at the top, and the bottom are going to be slaves. So the top women are going to have a little bit more power, a little bit more saying, like his mother, like his favorite wife or his favorite mistress or whatever. They're going to have a lot more power in the Islamic world, or in the Islamic harem of women. Okay. And finally, after the death of the Sultan, the entire retinue of women was banished to the Palace of Tears. So all 10 to 12,000 of these women had to go forever to mourn the loss of the Sultans, of Suleiman the Magnificent. Would we do that today in 2020? I don't think so. But back then in the 1550s, 1560s, that area, it was acceptable, it was okay. And that's how people were expected to mourn the loss of a great ruler, especially if they had some kind of connection to him, be it his mother, his favorite mistress, or some of the slaves who worked in the palace and helped him out. Ottoman statecraft continued. Diversity and control allowed the Ottoman Empire to endure into the 20th century. One more time. Diversity and control allowed the Ottoman Empire to endure into the 20th century. All right, so the Ottoman Empire has so much land. At the height, they're going to be across 3 different continents. You're going to see them in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. So at the height, which means that as they start to lose land, they have a lot more land to lose, where they can still be around and still be a region, or still be a dominant area. So they're going to slowly lose parts of Europe, slowly lose parts of Africa, lose parts of Asia, but they're going to hold on to that Eastern European part all the way until the 20th century. So until 1900s, the Ottomans are going to be around. So from 1300 to 1900, long time. While Turkish was the official language of the administration, Ottomans promoted a flexible and tolerant language policy. So depending on where they are, they're going to say, hey, if you want to conduct business in your local language, who are we to stop you? As long as the administrative languages are being spoken in Turkish, why are we going to micromanage you? Ottomans allowed for regional autonomy, where local appointees could keep a portion of taxes for Istanbul and for themselves. So when they're taking taxes, all the money doesn't have to go straight to the Ottoman Empire. Some of it can go to the people, the local areas. You know what that does? People are happy about that. They don't have to give up all their money. They can still have protection and things they want and keep some of their money. That is how you keep people calm. If you're a conqueror and you're coming in and you're not the same culture or religion. If you take everybody's everything, they're going to fight back. But if you let them have some things, they're going to be like, oh, this isn't so bad. Let's stay around for a little bit. And we'll see that happening. In order to limit local autonomy, Ottomans created a corps of infantry soldiers and bureaucrats with direct allegiance to the sultans called janissaries. Oh, janissaries. So samurais, janissaries, mercenaries, those hired soldiers that are specifically loyal to the government, those are going to be employed in a lot of these conquered areas. Because it's like, yes, you can do what you want to do and have your autonomy, but I still want to watch you to make sure that you're not doing too much. Make sure that you actually are giving us our tax dollars. You're not taking everything. All right, so these janissaries are going to be Christian boys between the ages of 8 and 18. We're going to be conscripted from Europe. So conscripted just means a draft. If you see conscription, that means a draft. A draft means they're going to force you to go into the military. The U.S. Has a draft to this day. And guess what, young men? You have to sign up for it, but the young ladies do not. So all the young men, if you guys want to go to college and you guys want to get a job once you turn 18, you got to sign up for the draft, even though we're not going to probably have a draft where you're actually called. Next up, the recipients are going to have the best Islamic education in the world in the Ottoman military, religion, and administrative techniques. So they're going to be, not for lack of a better term, they're going to be kidnapped from the Christian areas and taken into Islamic areas and then forced to convert to Islam while they're learning at some of the best schools about the military, religion, and administrative techniques of the Ottoman Empire, which is going to help your empire last longer because you have people who are loyal to you, who you've given pretty much everything to, their jobs, their culture, their money, probably their families eventually. So you have built-in legacy, built-in loyalty with the Janissary class, even though they've been kidnapped from their homes and taken to a new area. All right, so all of these things are going to lead to the stability of the Ottoman Empire and why it's going to be so long lasting. So let's think about the social, political interactions, the culture, the economics, the continuities, the changes. So what's going to stay the same? What's going to change? All of those things. All right, so here's our map of the Ottoman Empire, and you can see at the height where they're going to be and how much land they're going to end up dominating and controlling. So if we look down by Mesopotamia, we can see kind of like the origins of some of the conquests and then how it's going to spread and go down south into Africa and into Europe. The purple part is going to be the expansion of Suleiman the Magnificent at the height. So we're going to see how it's going to expand and drop all the way down into Afro-Eurasia, which helps its longevity because as it starts to lose land, it then still has land even as it loses land because they have so much land. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop it right there. I think this is a good enough amount of time, about 30 minutes or so. So hopefully you guys had a chance to check out this video, enjoy it, and then I'll see you guys for the next video that's going to come up next week. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.